This special edition of Ron Hazelton's How-To Tips is compliments of your Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse.
Hi, I'm Ron Hazelton. You know, one of the things that I like best about taking on a home improvement project is that it gives me the opportunity to solve a challenging problem using just the right tools and techniques. I'm always on the lookout for clever ideas that save me time and money and give me more professional-looking results. In this special home video, I'm pleased to share with you some of my favorite tricks of the trade, collected from Ron Hazelton's Housecalls. I've tried every one of these, and they do work. I hope you find them as useful as I found them. You know, nothing makes an otherwise attractive bathroom more unattractive than an ugly line of caulk right here at the top of the tub. Well, there's an easy way to fix it. Start by putting a fresh blade in a utility knife, and then cut out the old caulk. You'll want to make two cuts. The first with the knife blade lying almost flat on the edge of the tub. The second with it tipped up at about a 45-degree angle. This way, most of the old caulk will come out in one piece. For any caulk remaining on the tub or the tile, take a razor blade and simply scrape it off. To get rid of any remaining mildew, add the equivalent of 6 ounces of bleach to a gallon of water. Mix it up a little bit, and then take a toothbrush and give the joint here a good scrubbing. Choose a sealant that's designed specifically for kitchens and baths. Now, putting sealant in couldn't be simpler. Just gently squeeze the handle and keep consistent pressure. And don't put a bead down there any larger than you absolutely have to. Now, to give yourself a nice smooth bead, take a little bit of dishwashing detergent, put it in some warm water, dip your finger in that soapy water, and just draw it right along that freshly put down sealant. Now, that's just as attractive as the rest of your bathroom. You know, the joint between your door and window frames and the side of your house is a place where water, drafts, even insects can enter your home. Now, typically those are sealed with caulk, but after years of exposure to sunlight and weather, well, that caulk can fail, just like this. The first step to solving this problem is to remove the old caulk. Now, two tools that work best for me are the putty knife and the utility knife. The putty knife works best for prying away material that's already loose. For more stubborn caulk, try cutting it away with the utility knife, and then peel it away. To make sure the new caulk will adhere properly, it's important to remove all the small bits and pieces of old material. For this, I like to use a clean, dry paintbrush. For a sealing job like this, I'd recommend a siliconized latex acrylic caulk. The nozzle on a caulking cartridge is tapered. The further back you cut it, the wider the bead of material. Cut the nozzle so that the bead is slightly wider than the gap that you have to fill. Now, it's usually best to start at the top and work your way down. Just use constant pressure on the trigger to give you a nice uniform bead. Now, smooth the caulk off using your finger. Again, it's best to start up here at the top. Finally, clean off the excess with a damp rag. Now, do this job right, use the right materials, and you can expect that caulk to last for 20 or 30 years. You know, sometimes the hardest part of a stripping job is getting that residual stripper and old paint out of the details, like the panel here in this old door. Well, here are 3 tips that'll make that go easier. Tip number 1, use a small bristle brass brush like this to get up inside these crevices and scrub out that leftover stripper. Now, you want to use a brass bristle brush because the brass bristles are softer and won't scratch the wood. Idea number 2, take a piece of dowel, put it in a pencil sharpener, and put a point on it, just like this one, and use that to get into those hard-to-reach spaces and to get out that nasty stuff. And tip number 3, take some kitty litter, that's right, kitty litter, and sprinkle it on the excess stripper that may have been left behind. It's very absorbent. If you just move it around with your hands like this, it'll pick up all that extra material. And then all you have to do is either brush or vacuum it off. Now, what could be easier than that? When you're filling nail holes in unfinished wood like this, use a color-matched wood putty like one of these. Apply it with a putty knife, let it dry, and then sand it smooth. For finished wood, though, like these stairs, you can't use the cellulose putty because the sanding would scratch the surface. For this, you'll need a color-matched wax pencil. Just rub the pencil over the nail hole and rub off the excess with your finger or a cloth. Now, how often does this happen to you? You're pouring paint from a can and you end up with the rim full of paint. What a mess. And when you try to put the lid back on, you've really got a mess. Well, here's a way to keep that from happening. When you open the can, and before you pour it, take a 16-penny nail and drive some holes around the rim. This way, any paint that would have collected in the rim will drain back into the can. What could be neater? You know, when you're doing interior painting, painting things in the right order can save you time and give you more professional results. For example, you want to paint the edges of the wall before you paint the wall itself. Now up here, where the wall meets the ceiling, this is a great tool to use. It's a painting pad with some guide wheels right here that'll roll along the ceiling. Very simple to use. Just place it on the wall and pull it along. Next, paint your woodwork, like your baseboards and your trim. That's right. Paint this before you paint the wall. And you don't have to worry if you get some of this trim paint on the wall itself. Now, paint rollers throw off tiny specks of paint when you use them. So we'll want to protect this newly painted baseboard down here before we start rolling. You can do that with some painter's tape or masking tape. The idea is just to put the tape on the very top of the baseboard like this so that it acts as sort of a shield. That way the paint specks will fall on the tape and not on the baseboard. Now, once the trim paint is dried, we'll cut the wall color in to meet it, again, using the paint pad with these guide wheels. There's no faster way to paint those inside corners than with this corner painting pad. Finally, roll out the walls. The results will be neat, clean, and look like they were done by an expert, which of course they were. You know, nothing can make a room come alive like paint, especially when it's applied using faux finishing techniques. Now, I want you to meet a friend of mine, Victoria Dennis. Hey, Victoria, good to see you again.
Hi, Ron, good to see you.
Victoria's going to show us a few techniques that will add pizzazz to any room. Now, this is not just paint, is it?
No, actually, this is a latex paint mixed with a clear glaze.
Okay.
Okay. And basically, all that we're going to do is ball up that rag nice and tight.
That's a damp rag?
Damp rag.
Okay.
Dip that right into the paint. Blot it out a little bit. You don't want it on too thick. And this is a striping technique that we're doing.
So I can imagine what's going to happen when we take this off. Where you've got the masking tape, there's not going to be any of the red glaze you're putting on right now.
Correct.
Now let me ask you a question. Once you put this on, how long do you have to wait before you take the tape off?
You want to remove the tape fairly quickly. We don't want any of this glaze to dry.
Okay.
So we're going to begin right away. Just very carefully peel the tape down. And there you have it.
Very nice.
Thank you.
This ever happened to you? You start a painting job, you have to leave for whatever reason. When you come back, the masking tape just won't come off the surface without doing some damage. Well, here's an easy way to get it off. Use a hairdryer. Now hold the hairdryer just about 3 or 4 inches from the tape. The heat will soften the adhesive as you gently pull it off the wall. This technique will work on almost any kind of tape or label and remove it from wallpaper, painted finishes, or even furniture. You know, to me, tips and techniques are like jewels. Here are a few more that I'm sure you'll want to make part of your problem-solving toolbox. Whenever you have to pull nails out of a sheetrock wall, you've got to be very careful that the hammer, as you pull, doesn't punch a hole through the sheetrock. So here's a tip you can use. Take a wide putty knife, slip it behind the hammer, and use that to protect the surface. If you've got nails that are very far in like this, a little too far in for the hammer to grip, try this tool, parrot nose cutters. Just grip the nail, rock the cutters back and forth, keep taking this down to the base of the nail until you've gotten the entire thing out. If you've got to cut several pieces of wood to the same length, here's a fast and accurate way to do it. Take a power miter box and attach it to a workbench like this, and then take some scrap wood and create a little stop block right here. That way when you make your cut, you put the wood up against the stop block and saw. Great thing about it, no matter how many of these you make, they're going to be exactly the same length. I'm in the middle of installing a handrail right here, and I've run into a very familiar problem. And that is that the angle down here does not match the angle up here. And you'd think it would, or it should. The reason it doesn't is because one or both of these posts are not plumb or vertical. They're not running parallel. So the point here is anytime you're attaching something new to something old, don't take it for granted that all the angles are the same. Check each one. You know, nothing is more frustrating than a stripped out screw head. But there is a way to get them out, especially when they're below the surface. Let me show you. The secret is this tool right here called a retractor. You use it with a handle, which you usually buy separately. Here's how it works. Start by drilling a small hole in the stripped out screw head. Insert the retractor into the hole and turn it counterclockwise. Now the more you turn it, the more it jams itself into the hole. And eventually it'll back the screw out. Screws like these, which were originally developed for drywall and wallboard, have become increasingly popular for woodworking projects. Partly because they can often be put into materials like this soft pine without even drilling a pilot hole. But you should be aware of one thing. Even though these screws can tighten up on the head like this, they may not pull two pieces of wood tightly together, as you can see right here. I've got this tight, there's still a big gap in between. The reason is that these screws have threads all the way up to the head. So in this case, it's tightening into this piece of wood before it's tightening into this one. The solution is to drill what I call a clearance hole. Now a clearance hole should be large enough to allow the screw to drop through without the threads having any effect. This way, when you tighten it into a second board, you can be absolutely certain that when the screw is tight here, it's also tight here. Not convinced? Well, let me show you my dollar bill test. Here are two pieces of wood, that same screw, no pilot hole. I'm going to tighten this down. Screw's tight. Let's see about the dollar bill. Slips out. Now, over here, we've got our clearance hole. Let's do the same thing. We'll drive the screw in. Make sure the head is tight. And give a tug on the dollar bill. That's not going anywhere. So the next time you want to use one of these kind of screws, remember those two words, clearance hole. You know, sometimes the simplest tip can save you time or prevent a mistake. Here are a few more that I've found especially valuable.
Many home improvement jobs, like installing a window or a medicine cabinet, require you to cut rather large holes in your wall. Now, it's a fairly easy job, but you want to avoid any unexpected surprises, like plumbing or electrical wires inside. So before I cut the large hole, I like to cut a small inspection hole. First, use an electronic stud finder to locate the wall studs. On our demonstration wall, I have drawn an outline for our hole. Now, the key to cutting this out is this saw right here called a drywall saw. It's got a very sharp point on the end, so the saw acts kind of as a drill as well as a saw. Place the sharp tip of the saw on the line, and then angle the saw at about 45 degrees. Push the saw, wiggle it back and forth until it penetrates through the wallboard. The angle cut prevents the cutout from falling inside the wall. If your inspection reveals a problem and you have to close up the hole, it's easy to do. Apply wallboard joint compound to the edges of the hole. Then press the cutout firmly in place. With a wider putty knife, smooth more joint compound on the surface. Now, we let this dry overnight, give it a light sanding, and skim on one more coat. You know, this is a great technique to use anytime you've got to cut a temporary hole in your wall, even if it's to find a plumbing leak or run electrical wires.
You know, sometimes the depth of the hole that you're drilling is critical, like it is right here, where I'm drilling holes in the side of this cabinet to receive these shelf supports. Now, here's a way to make sure you don't drill too deeply. Take the drill bit. In this case, I'll use the pin in the shelf support as a guide. I'll take a piece of tape and mark the depth of the hole. Then, as I drill, I'll simply stop when I get to the edge of the tape. Perfect fit and perfect depth. Do you get a little nervous when you're hammering finish nails into molding like this, afraid that maybe you'll miss it? Put a dent like this in the molding? Ouch. Well, here's a way to keep that from happening. Take a thin piece of wood and bore a hole in the end. Then slip that hole over the nail. Go ahead and hammer. If you miss, you hit the guard and not the molding. When you get down here, take the board off and finish off with a nail set. You know, whenever you're cutting through carpeting, vinyl flooring, or even roofing paper, your blade gets duller faster than you might imagine. That's because the surface underneath, as in this case, can be really hard. This happens to be concrete. So stop every few minutes and change that blade. It only takes a second, and you'll get a job that looks better and goes a lot easier. Something old, something new. You just never know where that next great tip's going to come from. You know, objects like the detail on this cuckoo clock can be difficult to repair with conventional wood glues because they're almost impossible to clamp. Well, there is a glue, though, that doesn't require any clamping. Now, this is a cyanoacrylate glue made especially for porous materials like wood. On its own, it would dry in about a half a minute, but if I spray this accelerator on the matching part, the bond is practically instantaneous. If you ever find yourself dealing with a gouge like this and you're out of wood filler, well, it's not that hard to make your own. Let me show you how. First of all, take a small container, put in some glue. And to this, add some sawdust from the same wood that you've been working on. Stir it up thoroughly using a stick until you get a thick paste. Pack your custom-made wood filler into the hole and let it dry. A little sanding and your homemade putty patch is complete. You know, when you think about it, there are few things more beautiful in the evening than candlelight. But sometimes what you're left with the next morning, well, it's not so pretty. Wax strippings on your furniture. Now, there are two ways to get rid of these. The hot method and the cold method. Let's start with this one. Now, heat softens. In fact, it will liquefy wax. But the trick is to put on enough heat to melt the wax without damaging the furniture. For that, a hairdryer is perfect. For the cold method, you'll need some ice, or you can use frozen vegetables. I happen to like peas. The ice, or in this case the frozen vegetables, makes the ice very cold and very brittle, so that by taking something like this spatula, we can just chip it right off. So go ahead, light up those candles, enjoy a romantic evening. You've got nothing to fear from wax strips. When you know the proper technique, you can take on and solve almost any home improvement problem. You know, damage like this can happen to any piece of furniture, new or old. Here's an easy way to fix it. Now, this is the first of two materials we'll need to make this repair. This is auto body filler. This is a two-part material. This is the catalyst. Notice this is red and the resin is gray. When it's thoroughly mixed, it'll be a uniform pink. Now, to keep this from spilling out of the damaged area, we're going to take some tape and put it right along the edge of the table like this. This will keep it from spilling out this way. And then we'll take our filler and force it down into that cavity right there. Now I've waited about 3 or 4 minutes until this fellow is just in a rubbery state. Now we're going to take off this tape first of all. And then, this is very important, while this is still in a rubbery state, I'm going to take a knife and cut off the excess. In a few more minutes, this is going to get so hard, the only way to shape it would be with a file. Okay, now we're going to let this dry a little bit longer, then we'll come back and do some sanding on it. I don't want to go off onto the surrounding table any more than I have to. Okay, now that's perfectly flat and perfectly smooth. Now the second material that you'll need to do this project are artist acrylic colors, because we're going to end up blending these to match the color of the wood. The nice thing about the acrylics is that we can keep going on top of them until we get the right color. The real trick here is to be patient when you're mixing your colors. If you don't get it right the first time, just try it again. I've been reflecting on a problem. What I've got here is a heavy mirror and an old plaster wall, 75 years old. Now, what's the most secure way to hang this? In this case, the original hanging hardware has to go, so I remove it. Then I measure an equal distance down both sides, drill pilot holes, and attach hanger straps using short screws. Braided picture wire is looped through the straps and twisted back upon itself. The next step is to draw a level line on the wall where the top of the frame will be. I stretch the hanging wire taut and measure the distance between the wire and the top of the frame. That's the distance below the level line I just drew that I'm going to place the wall hangers. Toggle bolts are usually the best way to hang heavy objects on plaster walls. The spring-loaded wings of the toggle bolt fold together. Once inside, the wings spring open. I'll drill a hole large enough to allow the folded wings to pass through. A piece of masking tape helps keep the plaster from cracking or chipping. Finally, I pull gently on the bolt as I tighten it, which will keep the toggle from spinning inside the wall. With both toggle bolts tightened firmly, it's time to hang the mirror. You just hoist this up here, put it on the hooks, make sure we catch both of them. Slide it back and forth a little bit, make sure it's level. Now the beauty of a two-hook system is that once you get it level, it stays level. One of the darkest spots in your kitchen is actually a place where you most need light, and that's right here on the countertop underneath these wall cabinets. The cabinets and sometimes your body create shadows, making it difficult to see under here. But there is a way to get light here without spending a lot of money or a lot of time. The answer is a thin profile fluorescent light designed specifically to go under cabinets. They're easy to install, just a few steps. These fixtures require that you remove the diffuser and bulb in order to reach the screw mounting hole. Place the light fixture in the position you want it. Fixtures like this should go as far forward as possible. Next, mark the position of the mounting holes. Then, drill a pilot hole and attach the fixture using short panhead screws. Now, fixtures like this usually have to be plugged in. The question is, what do you do with all this cord? Well, by using plastic conduit like this, you can conceal it and end up with an installation that's very clean and professional looking. Measure each section of conduit and then cut it to length with a utility knife. To install it, all you have to do is peel off the protective coating from the pressure-sensitive back and stick it in place. The electrical cord simply slips into the slot on the side. With the cord concealed, all that's left is to reinstall the bulbs and the diffuser. You know, I can't think of an easier or less expensive way to get good work light into your kitchen. And best of all, it takes up practically no space. Well, here's one way to create a romantic mood with lighting, but you can also do it by replacing a standard on-off light switch with a dimmer switch. It's really easy. Here's how. The first step in this and any electrical job is to turn the power off at the circuit breaker or fuse panel. To prevent anyone from turning the circuit on accidentally, put a piece of tape on the breaker. Next, remove the screws that are holding the switch plate. Now here's where I like to use this tester to make sure that there is no electricity present. If there were, the tester would react like this. Next, remove the two screws that are holding the switch itself in place. Loosen the terminals and disconnect the wires. If the wires aren't wrapped around the terminals like these were, they may have been placed in the back of the switch, like this. If that's the case, to remove them, take a small screwdriver, place it in the slot next to the wire, and simply pull it out. If the ends of the wires are bent, clip them off and strip off the insulation. Attach the wires coming out of the wall to the wires from the dimmer switch by twisting them together and securing them with a plastic wire nut. Then carefully fold the wires as you press them back into the box and screw the switch in place. Finally, replace the switch plate and restore the power. Well, there you have it, a romantic setting at the flick, or should I say, the twist of a switch. You know, some of my tips and techniques I've discovered myself, but the great majority other people have been kind enough to share with me. Well, it's time for me to get back on the road. You never know where that next tip's going to come from.